Good day, everyone. Today, we will be discussing Vygotsky's sociocultural theory and how it connects to language learning. According to Lev Vygotsky, learning is not just an individual process but a social one. This means that we learn best through interaction and collaboration with others. When we use a target language, it's not only about memorizing words or grammar, it's about communicating, sharing ideas, and learning together. From the 1990s onward, scholars like James Landholt and his colleagues applied Vygotsky's theory to second language learning. They showed that our social environment and cultural context shape how we learn languages. As highlighted by Landhof 2000 and Thorne 2006, sociocultural theory emphasizes that learning happens through meaningful interactions within a community. Social cultural theory was developed by Lev S. Vygotsky. He is a Russian psychologist who lived from 1896 to 1934. Unlike Jean Piaget, who focused more on individual development, Vygotsky focused on social interaction as the key to learning. His ideas were not very popular in the Soviet Union at first, but later become highly influenced worldwide. His major work, Thought and Language, 1962, later republished as Thinking and Speech. This became the foundation for this theory. After the 1960s, his work was expanded by the theorists like Jerome Bruner, James Wirch, and Barbara Rogoff, who helped apply it in classrooms and second language studies. As Vygotsky and later researchers emphasize, learning happens through social interactions, collaboration, and especially when guided by more knowledgeable people. One of Vygotsky's key ideas is mediation. He believed that humans don't act directly on the world, so instead, we use tools and symbols to interact with it. So, according to Landolf and Thorne around 2006, mediation is essential to social-cultural theory. So, these mediating tools can be physical, like technology, art, or instruments, or even symbolic, like language, numbers, and music. So these tools are passed down through culture and generations. For example, we learn to use language, which is our most important mental tool, which is it helps us to plan, solve problems, and express ideas. So, in short, uh, language does not just help us communicate, it helps us to think, to understand, and also that's why Vygotsky said that our mental tools like writing and language systems changed how humans understand the world.
Good day, everyone. I am Sugar Guinares. So, our topic says that learning a language is social, right? Like, we learn better when we interact and communicate with others, especially with people who are more skilled, like teachers or classmates. And the first key idea of this is regulation. When we are still learning, we rely on others for help. And this is called other regulation. But as we practice and understand more, we eventually learn to do things on our own. And this is called self-regulation. So the goal is to move from needing guidance to becoming independent. And this shift happens through a process called internalization or appropriation, which means we first learn skills through shared activity with others, and later we make the knowledge our own. And the second idea is scaffolding, which refers to the support given by a more knowledgeable person to help the learner. Scaffolding has four features. First, the helper gets the learner involved in a meaningful activity that is slightly challenging. Second, the helper checks the learner's current skills to know how much help is needed. Third, the help can come in different forms like hints, questions, examples, or demonstrations. And fourth, the help is slowly reduced as the learner becomes more confident and can handle the task alone. So, scaffolding is basically like, I'll support you now, but eventually you will do this independently. And the last concept is the zone of proximal development, or the ZPD. This is the space between what the learner can do alone and what they can do with help. Real learning happens in the zone where the task is not too easy, not too difficult, it's just right with guidance. Okay, so here in my next slide, here is another important idea in the social-cultural perspective, that is microgenesis. So microgenesis refers to the moment-by-moment development of learning that happens during interaction. So it is where we can actually see understanding changing in real time while a learner is being guided. So Vygotsky explained this using what he called the genetic law of cultural development. He said that every mental function appears twice. First, at the interpsychological level, meaning between two people in social interaction. Then, at the intrapsychological level, meaning inside the individual, after the learner has internalized the knowledge. So, learning always moves from social to individual. And this pattern also appears in different timescales of human learning. First, in phylogenesis, it refers to how learning develops across human history and evolution. And in ontogenesis, it refers to how learning develops within the individual from childhood to adulthood. And in microgenesis, it is the immediate, moment-to-moment learning process during interaction. And even adults learning a second language continue to learn in the same pattern. First through guidance, then through independent use. And in social cultural research naman, Vygotsky also introduced a method called double stimulation. So this means that during a learning activity, a stimulus or tool is introduced, like for example, a word list, visual aid, or prompt. And the researcher observes how the learner uses that tool to solve a problem. The focus is not on test scores, but on how thinking develops during the interaction. On my last assigned part is another important part in social-cultural theory is private and inner speech. In Vygotsky's view, language is not just for communicating with others. It is also a tool for thinking. So, when we see young kids talking to themselves while doing something, like, okay, I put this here, then I draw here, this is called private speech. In Piaget's theory, that was seen as egocentric, like the child is only focused on themselves, but Vygotsky explains it differently. For him, private speech shows that the child is already learning how to control and guide their own actions. It's like they are using language to help themselves think and solve problems. And eventually, this private speech becomes inner speech, meaning it moves from being spoken out loud to being silent in the mind. And that's how we develop our internal thinking voice. So as we grow, language shifts from interpsychological or between people to intrapsychological or inside a person. And this connects to ontogenesis, the development of an individual over time, and microgenesis, the development of a skill in a short moment while doing a task. Even adults sometimes go back to private speech, especially when something is hard, like saying, okay, wait, calm down self and think, like just like that. And this shows how language is always a symbolic tool that helps us organize our thoughts. It also reflects Vygotsky's idea of double stimulation, where we use tools like words to guide ourselves through challenges. And that's all for my part. Arigato.
Now, let's move to activity theory, which was developed by Alexei Leontiev, which is one of the Vygotsky's followers, and later expanded by Iriyo Engstrom in 1999 and 2010. So the diagram you see here represents Engstrom's model of an activity system. It shows how our actions are shaped by different elements like tools, rules, community, and division of labor. So, in this model, the subject is the individual, the object is the goal or purpose, and the instruments are the tools used to achieve that goal. So the community rules and division of labor all influence the activity. So this shows that human behavior can be separated from its social context, which is our actions only make sense when we consider the system we are part of. To summarize, activity theory helps us understand how individual actions connect to a broader collective system. As Leontiev 1981 explained that individual actions like a hunter chasing an animal only make sense as part of the collective activity of getting food or clothing. This idea connects back to Vygotsky's sociocultural theory, which both emphasize that learning and behavior are shaped by social interaction, cultural tools, and community. Overall, these theories remind us that language learning is not isolated. It's a shared, meaningful, and social driven process. In other words, we learn best together within a culture that gives meaning to our actions.
So good day everyone. I am Princess Maylin Pacaldo and now let's proceed to discuss the applications of sociocultural theory to second language learning. So, according to sociocultural perspective, language learning now happens through social interaction and shared meaning making. This means that we learn language not just by memorizing the words or grammar, but by communicating and collaborating with others in our community. In this view, language itself is a tool for making meaning. Children first learn their first language through interactions with adults or the people around them. Then, when learning a second language, they use what they already know from their first language to build new meanings in the new one. Vygotsky's concept of the zone of proximal development, or what we call the ZPT, is also important here because it means that we learn best when someone more skilled, like the teacher, peers nga more skilled pa, or even parents. It helps us perform a task we can't yet done alone. Over time, that knowledge becomes internalized or truly learn nga kita lang nga walay guide sa uban. So, in second language learning, new knowledge is jointly constructed through interaction, whether in the classroom or in natural situations. Learners are not passive, they are active agents who create, use, and understand language through
Now,
collaboration. Let's proceed to discuss about the self-regulation, private speech, and languaging and second language discourse. As we all know, self-regulation means controlling your own learning. For example, focusing, you're correcting mistakes, and managing your progress. One way learners develop self-regulation though is through private speech, talking to yourself while learning. It may sound simple, but it actually helps a lot in thinking, focusing, and even solving language problems. For example, there's a Japanese child named Mizu, and he was learning English and kept saying phrases like house, big house, garage house. From sa imong point of view, abi namang nagadula lang siya. But in the sociocultural view, it shows how the child was practicing and solving problems using the new language. Another example, there's a student who is learning English, tapos nag-say siya yung sarili o sentence like, yesterday I went to the market. That shows how private speech helps her think truly and correct her own grammar or sentence. By talking sa iyang sarili, she becomes more aware of her mistake and remembers the correct form of the sentence. In that way, she practices self-regulation because she is controlling and guiding her own learning without needing help from adults. Another researcher, si Ami Ota, she studied learners of Japanese. She found out that students often whispered new Japanese words or they are repeating teacher sentences quietly to themselves. This helped them with their pronunciation, grammar, and even sentence building. Otto found three main types of private speech. First is repetition, repeating what the teacher said. Next is the vicarious response. They are answering privately even if wala sila gitawag sa teacher. And lastly, manipulation. They are building or breaking down sentences to test their understanding. Another researcher is Swain introduced the term languaging, which means thinking out loud, using language to understand grammar and meaning better. All this shows that talking to oneself while learning is not meaningless. It's a key part of internalizing the new language. The new language. Learners use it to gain control and independence in their learning process. And now, let's talk about the activity theory and its applications to small group interaction and online communication. Activity theory says that learning depends on the goal, the context, and the tools we use. This means that even if two people do the same activity, their experience and learning might be different because ilahang goals o how they understand the task. For example, si si Platt and Brooks daw studied students doing the same English task in the class. Some were fully engaged daw and nakalearn more, while others naman just went through the motions. This shows that students' goals and motivation affect how much they learn. Another researcher, si McCafferty, also found that um, learners remembered new Spanish words better when they used them in goal-based tasks like interviews compared to when they just memorizing vocabulary lists. This shows that language is learned best when it's used for real purposes. Later on, researchers applied this theory to online communication. Si Tom, nag-study siya sa mga students learning languages through email and instant messaging. In one case, ang naa daw ito'y American student nga si Christine daw, a friend og French student named Olivier first used email, which felt too formal and slow daw. But when they switched to instant messaging, their conversations became more natural and interactive, and Christine improved her French faster. Kato nga examples shows how technology and social tools affect language learning. It's not just about what we learn, but also how and where we learn it. In short, activity theory reminds us that effective language learning happens when learners are active, motivated, and engaged, using meaningful tools like group work or online communications to express themselves.
Good day, everyone. I'm Jana San Miguel po, and I'll be discussing section 8.3, which is about meditation, languaging, and second language learning in the zone of proximal development. So according to Vygotsky, sociocultural theory, learning a language is a process.
So learners develop better when they interact, communicate, and work with others. So the zone of proximal development or ZPD refers to the distance between what a learner can do alone and what they can do with help from a teacher or a more capable peer. So, for example, a student may not yet know how to form questions like, "Where are you going?" on their own, but then the teacher models the pattern and gives guided practice. The student can gradually learn to form a similar sentence independently. So, the concept of languaging means using language to think, reflect, and make meaning. So, when learners talk about how language works, for instance, saying we add ed for past tense, right? So they are languaging. So this process helps them better understand grammar and vocabulary through active communication. That's all for 8.3. So the next one is 8.1, the teacher mediation in the L2 classroom. So this part focuses on the teacher's role as a mediator in the second language classroom. So teachers provide support or scaffolding to help students complete tasks they can't yet do on their own. For example, if a student says he go to school every day, the teacher might respond almost right. So remember, with he, we say goes through this kind of feedback. The student learns the correct form of and becomes more confident in using it. So as student improve, the teacher gradually reduces the amount of help. So this process encourage self-regulation, meaning learners can notice the meaning the learners can notice and correct their own mistake without always depending on the teacher. So the last part is the dynamic assessment. So dynamic assessment combines teaching and testing instead of just checking what learners already know. So it looks at the they can do with guidance and support. So for example, during an oral test, if a learner forgets a word, the teacher might give a small hint like it's the opposite of cold. So when the student answers hot, it shows that with a little help, they can recall the right word. So this type of assessment um, helps teachers see not only the learner's current ability but also their potential to improve. So it treats assessment as part of learning process rather than something separate from it. That's all for my part.
My name is Aaron Clyde Arvillarta, and in continuation here, our new topic, which is titled Peer to Peer Dialogue and Languaging Within the CPD. So, and first things first, Vygotsky's zone of proximal development originally meant the gap between what a learner can do alone and what they can do with an expert's help. However, today, because of social cultural theory, it expands that idea. Peer collaboration is now a valid ZPD too. As Wells in 1999 points out, learning in the ZPD doesn't require a formal teacher. participants can scaffold each other and grow from mutual contributions. Added here from researchers like Swain 2002, Lantel and Thorne 2006 show three common interaction settings in L2 classrooms. So first here is oral L2 production. Learners practice speaking together, co-constructing utterances, and giving instant feedback. Next is focus on form activities. Peers notice and discuss grammatical or lexical patterns, turning language use into a learning tool. And lastly, collaborative L2 writing. Students co-write texts, negotiate meeting, and scaffold each other's writing development. So from the next slide here, the table, it is titled Methods of Assistance Occurring During Classroom Peer Interaction. This was from the author, which is Ota, in his study in 2000 and 2001. So first here, the first strategy is waiting. One partner pauses and allows the speaker time to reflect or self-correct, showing implicit support. Next is prompting. The partner repeats a syllable, word, or phrase that was just uttered, cueing the speaker to continue. And co construction. The partner supplies a needed linguistic element, a syllable, word, or phrase to complete the utterance together. And then lastly is explaining. The partner provides an explicit clarification, often in the learner's L1 first language, to resolve uncertainty. And next is repair strategies. The first one here is initiating repair. The partner signals a problem by saying huh as a rising intonation and invites the speaker to self correct. Providing repair, the partner directly corrects the error. And lastly, asking the teacher. The teacher acknowledges the mistake and seeks helps from the instructor for clarification. So in this next slide is a setting from Swain and Lapkin in 1998. They set up a jigsaw activity with two French immersion students. Each of them got half of a picture story, and they had to figure out the whole story together and write it up. While they were doing that, they kept pausing to talk about stuff like, is this verb reflexive? Those language talk moments are what the researchers call language related episodes. In short, LREs. The pair that talked the most, mentioned in the slide, was Kim and Rick. They ended up with the best story. Not only that, they actually learned the vocab and grammar on the spot. They were suggesting ideas, checking each other, correcting mistakes, and even using their first language to keep the flow. And still, later tests showed they still remembered the words and structures they debated. But according to Storch, 2002, not every group clicks. Some get super competitive, which kills the whole collaborative vibe. That's why folks here, who is Mercer 2000 and Klinger and Vaughan 2000, came up with structured routines to steer learners towards cooperative dialogue instead of showdown. In the next slide, Swain and her colleagues coined the term languaging to describe the way learners treat language itself as a tool for thinking. When you talk through a problem, whether it's private speech, whispered to yourself, or a collaborative dialogue with a peer, you are turning fleeting ideas into something concrete. That concrete talk helps you internalize new knowledge and also externalize it, making it visible for further reflection. Importantly, languaging can happen in the learner's first language or second language, and it becomes especially valuable when the task is cognitively demanding because the act of verbalizing forces you to organize, clarify, and evaluate concepts in real time. In this next page, titled Concept Based Instruction, it integrates Vygotsky's social-cultural theory, where instruction precedes and shapes development, with insights from cognitive linguistics to furnish explicit conceptually grounded accounts of grammatical structures. This synthesis underpins the pedagogical approach known as languaging, wherein learners externalize and internalize knowledge through verbal mediation. In citations here from Galperin and Neguarella in 2008 outlines the foundational tenets of this framework. So first here is concepts as minimal unit of instruction. Pedagogical focus rests on single coherent concepts. Examples are aspect, tense, and modality, rather than isolated forms. Two is materialization of concepts. Concepts are rendered as concrete, didactic tools, visual schemas, charts, or symbolic representation that mediate learning. And third is verbalization. Learners engage in private speech, peer dialogue, and self explanations to transform mental constructs into communicative language. And lastly, interconnectedness of meaning. Conceptual categories are explicitly linked, illustrating how meanings interrelate within a network system of language. Next from this page is a graph from Negrella's. With the help of this diagram, the findings showed that individual verbalization produced stronger learning gains. After the instruction, students shifted from using simple rule of thumb statements to articulating meaning based explanations. Their written production also became more accurate, and they reported a positive experience with the languaging process, noting that talking or speaking to themselves helped them see the logic behind the forms.
Hello everyone, I'm Althea Lee now and I will be discussing about the evaluation of social cultural theory. In second language, social cultural theory learning is the most original for viewing social interaction not merely as a context for learning, but as its very source of the primary driver of cognitive development. Its key claims supported by a substantial body of empirical research focus on concepts such as the zone of proximal development or the ZPD, mediation through cultural tools, especially the language and the process of interaction. So, here is a question about the social cultural theory or what are is the most original features and how far have its claim been empirically established? So the most original features of social cultural theory derive from the derive from Vygotsky thoughts. This includes the social interaction in paramount, mediation by cultural tools, the zone of proximal development, scaffolding, internalization, and private speech, and the dynamic assessment. So the claims of social cultural theory have been substantially established through a growing body of empirical research, primarily using the qualitative microdevelopmental studies that analyze interactions in detail. This includes the studies of peer and expert novice interaction, corrective feedback, case studies, and the dynamic assessment or DA. So while some theoretical limitations are noted, such as the challenge of precisely meaning the ZPD and the heavy reliance on verbal interactions, the empirical evidence from interactionist and classroom-based studies largely supports the core of the core of social cultural theory claims about the social and mediated nature of second language learning. Next topic is the scope of social cultural research. It discusses how social cultural theory is used to study a second language learning, emphasizing that learning is a social process deeply connected to how we interact approaches that separate the social and the psychological aspects of learning and treat language as an abstract system disconnected from its use. Social cultural theory suggests that we learn by interacting with others within our zone of proximal development, or the ZPD, eventually internalizing this social knowledge. Zone of Proximal Development, or ZPD, is a concept introduced by Vygotsky, which refers to the gap between what a learner can do independently and what they can achieve with guidance from a more knowledgeable person, while the mediation is the process by which more knowledgeable individuals assist learning in their ZPD, providing support and guidance to help them develop new skills and knowledge. So, we have an example for that, and this is the example. Imagine a student's learning to write a new language, which initially they struggled with grammar and sentence structure. So, a teacher, which is the more knowledgeable person, provides guidance, offering corrections and suggestions. So this interaction occurs within the student ZPD. So through this mediation, the students gradually improves their writing skills, eventually internalizing the rules and structures of the new language. They can then wrote more independently. In essence, it argues that understanding learning requires um, looking at the social context in or looking at the social context in which it occurs and how interaction with others help learners develop new linguistics and cognitive skills. Next topic is about the socio-cultural interpretation of language and communication. So it explained how socio-cultural theory interprets language and communication, emphasizing the role of language as a tool for thoughts and joint knowledge construction rather than just a means of transmitting the information. Social cultural theory sees language less as a set of rules and more as a flexible toolkit we use to build understanding together. It's not just about sending information from one person to another, but about creating new knowledge through interaction. This view is moreover away from traditional ideas about language as a fixed system and focusing more on how we use language to communicate and think in real-world situations. It emphasizes that language is a dynamic, flexible tool that we use to build knowledge and understanding together through social interactions. It's not just about following rules, but about using language, creativity, and forcefully to achieve our goals. That's all. Thank you.
Social cultural theorists treat language learning just like any other knowledge. First, it's social, then it becomes individual. Learners aren't passive, they actively shape their own environment by picking goals and strategies. That's why the tradition focuses heavily on how learning happens, pouring empirical effort into illustrating those social first processes. However, most social cultural studies capture learning that's local, short term, and individual, which makes what counts as learning a bit fuzzy. From Swain and Latkin in 1998, they argue that learning is the collaborative dialogue itself. It isn't something that occurs outside performance, it occurs in performance, and it keeps building, emerging, and staying ongoing. Compared to other frameworks that obsess over rates and roots, Vygotsky's work is more agnostic. Some studies like Storch 2000, Nasaji, and Swan 2000 hint that timely scaffolding speeds things up, but opinions differ on whether a universal learning route exists at all. In summary, SCT has cemented itself as a powerhouse in L2 research, pushing bold theoretical claims and backing them up with a patchwork of empirical work. Its core ideas like the CPD, scaffolding, and activity theory, they offer fresh lenses on classroom basics like teacher-student talk, problem-solving tasks, strategy training, focus on form, and corrective feedback. And that's it. We have reached the end of the lesson. And once again, this is Group 5. Thank you and have a good day.